So can you win a Super Bowl if Jared Goff is your starting quarterback? Well, let's get into it, because I actually think it's a bit more of a complex question than you might think. Because first things first, you could sit here and say, well, yeah, obviously you can. Like, he went to a Super Bowl with the Rams, was just the 1 seed with the Lions, and the year before, they were in the conference championship game, and were only a couple plays away from winning that game where they would have played the Chiefs, who they beat earlier in the year. However, Jared Goff, when he was with the Rams, was in his rookie contract when he made the Super Bowl, and these past couple of years, his contract has been a lot lower than it's about to be. Money matters when it comes to this stuff. So let's talk about, first, we have to decide how we feel about Jared Goff as a quarterback. If you look at his box score stats, this might be a little bit small to read, sorry about that, but you see mostly very good box score stats. I mean, even his, with the exception of the Jeff Fisher year back in 2016, his bad year was 86.5 passer rating. He's been over 90 every other year and over 100 a handful of years, including his career best, 111 passer rating, and that's with 12 interceptions. So definitely some really good box score stats. However, if you followed this channel for a while, you've known I've always been a little bit lower on Goff than I think the masses are, because I think the box score stats can get a bit inflated by him playing in 2 really good situations. You look at his PFF grades for just another example. Again, I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. Let's bear with me if you're a PFF hater. We'll get through it together. You see, there's still good grades. Like, I don't think he's a bad quarterback. I've never felt like he's a bad quarterback. And I mean, sometimes he's been even a really good quarterback, like in 2023 and in 2018. Most of his career, though, he's kind of been in the 70s. In fact, almost all of his seasons, he's been in the 70s there, which is a very good quarterback. Not the tier 1, not Mahomes or Allen or Burrow, and I always kind of, when he gets put in the MVP discussion, that's when I say, wait, hold on. But for the most part, when we talk about him as like, okay, not that guy, but like kind of in the next tier maybe, I think that's a reasonable take to have with Goff. I was also curious in his postseason records. He's 5-5 in the playoffs, which of course a lot harder to win in the playoffs. You see his passer rating for each game. The ones in bold are the ones that he lost. The ones that aren't in bold are the ones that he won, or his team won, I should say. What's interesting is, so Goff kind of had a reputation of being a bit of a playoff choker prior to coming over to the Lions. You look at the passer rating grades. As I mentioned, he is someone who very rarely would have grades under 90 for the season, so he's usually above 90 pretty consistently every year. But you see, it took him till 2020, his 6th playoff game, to have a passer rating over 90. However, once he did, he kind of didn't look back for a while. He, was very good against both the Seahawks and the Packers, despite the fact that they lost against Green Bay. Then he had a really good playoff run, I would say, probably his career best playoff run just in 2023 when he, kind of the first playoff run with the Lions. They beat the Rams where he was very good. They beat the Buccaneers where he was very good. And then they beat the Niners, they lost to the Niners, and he was maybe not quite very good in that game. He made some plays early on, did miss a couple throws late, or I would even say more so, just couldn't really be much of a playmaker when they needed him to be late. There was a couple plays where the initial play didn't work, and just that's not his game. He needs something to be, he's a pocket passer. Very good at it, but that's not his game. And then obviously, his worst game, maybe of his playoff career, no, the Super Bowl against the Patriots was still worse, but a very bad game against the Commanders. Had some good plays in there, but ultimately too many turnovers in that one. But also, that's kind of how, playoff football works, right? Most quarterbacks have some good games and some bad games. It's very rare to get a Patrick Mahomes or a Tom Brady who's consistently good, and I would even throw Matthew Stafford as a guy who's maybe not an elite level player in the regular season, but is consistently good in the playoffs. Those guys are rare. Most players are Goff, who are going to have some good playoff runs and some not so good playoff runs. To me, the discussion is less about how good we think Goff is, because I think most of us are going to be in the same agreement here. I think most of us agree, yeah, he's not Lamar Jackson, he's not Joe Burrow. Most of us are also going to agree he's still good, he still can make plays and have, good seasons. The question is, can you win with a Jared Goff type, a quarterback who is getting paid big money, but maybe isn't a superstar level player? Is that possible? So I've created a chart to hopefully help you understand why it's often so difficult to win a Super Bowl with someone like Jared Goff, why it basically never happens, and why I'm always so hard on these mid-tier contracts, as I was hard on, the Tua contract and the Trevor Lawrence contract. Some of these, and Lawrence, there's other issues going on there, but you get the idea. So this is the chart I wanted to talk about. I'm going to go over 5 different players: Patrick Mahomes, Brock Purdy, Jalen Hurts, Jared Goff this season, and then Jared Goff's average contract as average pay per year. So first, how much are these guys getting paid? I'm going to use 2024 statistics for everyone except for the bottom, obviously, for Goff. Mahomes' cap hit was $37 million this year. It's going to balloon up to like $60 million next year, but it was very backloaded. He'll probably restructure. We know how that works. Purdy, it's actually a little under $1 million. I'm rounding up here. Jalen Hurts, only $13 million. Another really strongly backloaded contract. Goff, this year, again, it's backloaded, so it's only $27 million, but the average year for his contract will be $53 million. The next number is WAR, also known as wins above replacement. The way to look at this is if you got just some random quarterback off the streets, Teddy Bridgewater comes in, how many less wins would you have? It gets a lot more complicated. I'm kind of using more simple numbers here just to make the point more clear. But essentially, kind of the best you can get is 5. Like 5 is like MVP level, and sometimes even better than the average MVP level. Mahomes is usually around there of a 5-win quarterback. Brock Purdy and Jalen Hurts being a 2.5-win quarterback is just kind of that. I'll throw that as a solid number. And then Goff with 3 wins. I'm even going to say, hey, let's put Goff a little bit better than that. Again, a 3-win quarterback. We're talking about a top 10 quarterback, and maybe like 7th best quarterback of the season. That's a 3-win quarterback. So that's a very good number. So if these are the numbers, well, what do we do with this? Because you might sit here and say, well, that seems pretty good, right? I mean, Goff, okay, getting paid a little bit more than Mahomes and not quite as good as Mahomes, but you're not going to get a guy quite as good as Mahomes. This contract feels all right. And hey, he's a little better than Purdy and Hurts. I'd maybe rather spend some extra money just to get that half of a win. Half of a win's a big deal in this kind of thing. Sure. But here's where things get a little bit more complicated. So I've made up a couple of other statistics that are going to take a little bit of explaining, but I tried to do it in as simple a way as possible. Essentially, let's say your goal as an organization is to win 13 games. That's the goal, because the goal is to win the Super Bowl. Let's say 13 wins is what you consider to be a Super Bowl contending team. Then the question becomes, what is your wins per million needed without the quarterback contract? You take the quarterback contract out of the equation. How many, if you want to try and get to 13 wins, so for the Lions, they need an extra 10 wins. For the Chiefs, they need an extra 8 wins. You have the remaining chunk of money. How many wins per million are needed here? These are the numbers. Maybe it'll help you to understand what I'm saying when I show it this way. Patrick Mahomes would need, the Kansas City Chiefs can spend $26.6 million for each win down the road. So if there's a player who's going to get a $26 million contract and he's a 1-win player, that's a great contract to keep them in line to be Super Bowl champions. You see it gets a little bit lower for Purdy and Hurts, and even Jared Goff this year is kind of around that category, but then at the bottom, it drops all the way to 19.7, which, again, these numbers don't mean a lot. They're kind of confusing. What am I even talking about? So I decided to use another number just to hopefully help you visualize it a little bit more. I decided to call it real cap space just because that's, it doesn't really make sense, but that's just a term I came up with, and I also spelled, accidentally put the S and the C backwards. That was a typo. So let me just explain what this final category is going to be to help you visualize it. This is essentially how much cap space you would have if you take the total $250 million that the cap is this season. And let's say you just completely took the quarterbacks out of the equation. This is essentially how much you would have if you're going at the same ratio that you would need. So essentially, you see at the top of the list, Mahomes, we're keeping him at 250 because we're going to kind of compare everyone else to that. So if the Chiefs have 250 million with how much wins per million they need, then you look at the other quarterbacks. So Brock Purdy, Jalen Hurts, and even Jared Goff this year, it's a hit, right? The Eagles have to make up $25 million. The 49ers have to make up, 27 million is the actual number there, and the Lions had to make up 40 million. But then it drops all the way down to 185 million. It's essentially the same ratio. Again, this is the ratio, so it's not exactly like having Mahomes instead of Goff gives you a $75 million advantage, but essentially is the same thing. If you took away quarterback contracts, there's no quarterbacks in the NFL anymore, or, they're all the exact same caliber of player and all get paid the exact same amount, and then the Chiefs get $250 million to spend on the rest of their players, and the Lions get $185 million to spend on the rest of their players, it would essentially be the same thing as the way it's currently constructed now. I feel like I've gotten kind of confusing, so sorry if this is not making a ton of sense, but essentially the way it works is that part of why quarterback contracts are so important isn't just because I think Goff is like a bad quarterback. He's not a bad quarterback. He's a very good quarterback, but when you have Jared Goff, it's going to mean you're not going to be a bad team, probably. You'll probably at least be a competent team, maybe even a very good team. But what it's also going to mean when you have someone like Jared Goff is you can't get a Mahomes or even a Purdy or Hurts level contract because you have Jared Goff, who you're now paying a lot more. His contract, the good news, is backloaded, and you have another year of cheap, quote-unquote, cheap Goff money. He's going to be making only a little bit more than he made last year this following season. So could you win a Super Bowl with Goff? To come full circle, well, sure. Yeah, of course you could win a Super Bowl with Goff. Even if he's making $53 million a year, you just have to be that much better. You have to essentially be $75 million better than the Kansas City Chiefs, which you can do, right? Aiden Hutchinson isn't getting paid yet. He's about to get paid in a couple years, so that's concerning as well. But, you have been drafting well. That's usually the way to make up ground in that scenario. They could win a Super Bowl. It's possible. I think if they're going to, though, next year is probably going to be the year to do it. I would try to maximize my skill set for next year because that's when you still have a cheap deal where you're somewhat in the ballpark of Mahomes' contract, essentially, and maybe you can make some trades to try and make it up and surpass him. But more or less, there are 3 ways to win a Super Bowl. It is to have a quarterback play elite in the playoffs. That's what the Chiefs get. That's what you're seeing, a lot of times with the Bills, or, when they do well, have a quarterback play elite in the playoffs. The other way you can do it is have a quarterback who is still good, but you're not paying a ton of money. Brock Purdy, Jalen Hurts has done this these past couple of years. That's the other way that you can make that work. Sometimes you even get a weird blend of the two. Matthew Stafford was making $20 million because the Lions were paying him some of his contract the year that he won a Super Bowl with the Rams. And also he played elite in that Super Bowl run. So there's sometimes that situation happening. But the third and final way, which is what the Lions are trying to do, is pay a quarterback who's good but not elite level money, and hope you can be so good at everything else that you can still build the best roster in football. I'm not saying it can't be done, but they might be the first if they can pull it off. So we'll see how it works. But those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.